What is up, everybody? It is Thursday night. Grab yourself something cold to drink out of that old Ryan cooler. Kick your feet up. It's time for a new episode of Jackson Kayak Dock Talk. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? It's Dock Talk night. We've got a new panel, new questions, new answers. We're ready to go. I almost played the wrong intro video if you guys are watching it live and caught it. I about played the Jameson Redding wetness video that we had on the marketing meeting Doc Talk thing that we did the few weeks ago. So yeah, you guys were about in for a treat. I have to delete that one off my clipboard here. But there he is, Mr. Joey. Welcome to the house.
Howdy, howdy.
So we're going to kind of go around the room. I want you guys to introduce yourselves. Tell everybody what you're pedaling, fishing out of for 2023, and where you hail from. So we'll start with Miak Bassin.
Yeah, my name is Chris Pendergast. I live in Maine. I fish currently out of a Jackson Big Rig, but that's probably going to change next season. I'm currently fishing in an elite kayak fishing trail, the EKF here in the Northeast, and some local stuff in Massachusetts and Maine as well.
Moving on down to the one double-digit angler.
Hey, how's it going, guys? I'm out in the West Coast right now. I'm fishing out of the Take 2, custom rigged, and right now fishing Slay Nation TOC coming up. That's 10/28, I believe. So looking forward to that, and I'll be fishing the Bass Factory.
Mr. Joey.
Well,
Mr. Tennessee and you.
I'm fishing out of an ancient big rig, and I love it. It's a 7-year-old big rig, and it's a testament to how they build the boats. And I don't do tournaments. I did in my early life, and kind of decided that wasn't for me. You know, I want to compete against the fish, and I don't have anything against anybody else fishing tournaments. It's just that I go out there and want to figure things out. I'd say low tech, but it's no tech. I go out there and read the natural science, and I've caught a fish or two over the years.
Just a couple. So, guys, tonight we're going to start off with a little bit of something different. I want to throw something at you, and it kind of come up in our podcast on Tuesday night. I want to talk a little bit tonight about the kayak fishing culture. What is the kayak fishing culture to you, and how do you view it? Whoever wants to go first.
Okay, I will. When I started kayak fishing 10 years ago, I came right out of a flat bottom boat. So it wasn't like a gigantic jump for me to think that I was going to fish out of a small boat and not necessarily small waters. And then I honed some skills guiding kayak trips or canoe trips, in Canada for 27 summers. So you kind of learn that if you move too fast, you get a bath, but really a great experience. The kayak thing, because again, I'm not saying everybody doesn't have a right to do it their own way, but for me, I want to fool that fish. I want to do some things that probably nobody else is doing, and it's yielded several really big fish for me. And I take a lot of satisfaction out of the fact that I can go someplace I've never been before and kind of look at the topography, look at the water weeds, and look at a few things. And then I've rigged up with probably 4, maybe sometimes 5 rods and 2 3600 planos sitting side by side in my seat. So I like going out there bare bones and seeing what I can do.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I feel like the culture is a society of blue collar workers that can't, some may have a bass boat. There are bass boat guys, bass boat elite guys getting into kayaks. There's people that are sponsored by Hobie Eyewear and etc. And they've introduced kayaks into their vlogs on YouTube and etc. to kind of like enter that market. But I feel like the society in kayak, the culture is for that like blue collar worker that can't get 80,000, 100,000 plus full electronics with 30,000 16-inch screens on their boat, blah, blah, blah. And it's more for, I think, recreational side. It allows bank anglers that are always looking to like break a PB to actually hop on a kayak and cover water more efficiently. I think that is definitely like one of the cultures of kayak fishing is just getting out there in whatever means in trying to approach the bass or a different species in a different way.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, what you guys saying. I do it really to basically get out there anytime I can, anytime I want. I can just come home, slide the kayak in the back of the truck, or if I want to bring it out on my trailer, I can do as well. Get out there. I enjoy everybody I fish with. And I can go out on the water with anybody I want to go out with. And we can go do our separate thing. I can go learn a new thing. I can go anywhere I want. We don't necessarily have to stay together, but I fish with a great group of guys. I enjoy fishing with every one of them. And really, I probably do tournaments more to hang out with my friends that are live in all the other different states that I go to than I do to actually compete sometimes. So,
well, and you bring up a point. For me, one of the things is it's not like I think I'm some special character, but I don't fish with a lot of people because I have a certain plan that I want to do. And it sounds selfish, but I'll be 73 in 4 months. I'm going to fish the way I want to fish and go where I want to go. But the other thing is that I really enjoy about kayak fishing is we're not doing anything that somebody else can't do. Because if you want to buy a used kayak and put $500 into it and go no electronics, you can go the same places and do the same thing I'm doing. And I've always said, I know people will see the TV and the radio and this, that, and the other, the blog posts. I try to do 24, 36 blog posts a year, but I'm the guy next door. I'm not doing anything that somebody else can't do. And I like that. I like the idea that I can look at a 12 or 14-year-old kid and saying, let me tell you how to do that. Matter of fact, I'm doing that Saturday. I've got a chance to appear and do a personal appearance where I'm going to sell some books, but I'm also going to counsel some new kayakers. So I'm going to have fun doing that.
Yeah, right on. I believe the same thing. It's like anybody could get on the water now and cover water, and you don't have to be anybody special. You don't have to be part of a rich family to fish on a platform anymore. You could actually go out there and have just as much fun as being on a bass boat. It's the same deal, and it's super affordable.
Well, Chad's probably heard me say this before, but one of the things that I've always believed is that's why there's chocolate and vanilla ice cream, because everybody likes something different. So do what you like. If you're not, I still say one of the hallmarks of my presentations is if you're fishing and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. So, pick what you like to do. And I wouldn't advocate topwater fishing in January unless you live on the left coast, but
you can
do something that makes a little bit more sense and learn every time you go out. Learn on your own or from somebody else. That's a great resource if you got somebody else that'll show you.
Well, you could skip it across the ice for a hole if you want.
Ice is God's way of saying it's time to quit fishing.
No.
I think I need to go experiment ice fishing.
Yeah,
I haven't done that before.
You can still bring your kayak out. My big rig's got a big hole in the middle. You just dig a hole, you're good.
Yeah.
Sitting it still.
Lift up that prop door and just drop it down. But no, so like kayak fishing, do you think we're at a time too where I know this is another thing that come up from the podcast the other night, and I kind of want to keep playing into it just a little bit. Do you think that the sport, while we have, guys like Dominic that have fully rigged out kayaks, and we have guys like Joey that are, still fishing out of the 7-year-old boat that's, minimalist rigging, do you think that there is a movement back to the river guys that kind of started the movement altogether, where the boats are going to get smaller, a little bit more minimalistic, pick it up over your shoulder and carry it? Do you see that as something that's coming?
In
For me,
California,
go
go ahead,
ahead.
Joey.
For me personally, I love fishing a river, and we moved in December, and we live right on Woods Reservoir, and it's got gigantic fish in it. It's not a numbers lake, but it's got some really big fish in it. I caught one, and not knowing the lake, I hunt around and I'll kind of triangulate stumps and things that I can figure out, subsurface stumps, and caught a 9. We've only been fishing this lake since the middle of March, and we're still learning the lake. And again, it's whether it's the river, if you learn to read current. Matter of fact, I just finished a blog, and I've got another one coming up. I just finished a blog called "Don't Get Caught in the Speed Trap." Guys will say, I kind of laugh because I've done it all. When we had the TV show, I had the big 21-foot Triton, and people say, well, how fast will that boat go? And I said, I don't know, 65, 68. And I said, the hard part is I haven't figured out how to catch a fish going 65 miles an hour. So I stop, and I'm going to fish all that water people are running over. I'm going to eyeball some stuff and say, that looks like the spot.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, a lot of people run over fish and just don't know that they're under their boat. It's very true. The riverside, are things going to get smaller? So I live in a different world for you guys. Like, I think that's good that we have different people from different regions on this podcast, but in my Western region, I don't think smaller is better. I think bigger is better, because the lakes that we have are like highland reservoirs, open water. We're hitting like 30, 40 feet, main lake areas. We don't have a lot of creeks and etc. But that's not to say there's a bit. I mean, the biggest impact for, I'd say, bass fishing would probably be in the east, and that'll probably determine what the market needs, really. But yeah, maybe smaller on this. It's always been smaller side on the East Coast, and then I feel like on the West Coast, everybody wants to upgrade to like a 13 or 14 footer. That's what I feel.
Yeah, I just literally started fishing rivers this year. We have a lot more lakes. We do have rivers, but a lot of them are close to the feed into the ocean. I'm not a big saltwater ocean guy, so this year was really the first time. Like, I think the last time I was on this, I was going to the St. Lawrence River, so that was a whole different experience for me. So the whole time I'm thinking, all right, well, I love my big rig. I have no reason to get rid of it, although I did find a small crack the other day, but I am going to repair that. But next year I might actually go into a Kusa X as well, something that I can, like Joey's talking about, going minimalistic, just a couple of poles, just something I can drag out somewhere and go. And rivers are going to be something I'm really going to tackle next year.
I kind of chuckle when people say, so what do you do to customize your boat when you get it home? I said, I cut the plastic off and I go fishing. I mean, you can't get any more minimal than that. And I know what everybody, again, has something different. Some people want to catch smallmouth. We got an abundance of them down here. People want to catch, crappie. People want, so for me, it's like, I really like a big fish. And probably, I want to say it was probably 8 or 9 years ago. And I've got a picture of this. So it's, they say if there's no picture, it didn't happen. I got a picture of an 11.3 that I caught out of a river. And a river, you can read the current. You can read, what redirects water. You can tell what there's there for forage and kind of match that. And again, I see less traffic on a river than I do anywhere else.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Our river here is very, it's very quiet, all except for the Wednesday nighter that goes on. For the most part, you can get out there and pretty much be by yourself all day. But yeah, I think there's a time and a place. I think for these boats. You know, there's always there's a butt for every seat. Is kind of how we've always said it. Some of our buddies, you know, because there is. I mean, when you think about it, everybody wants something that's a little bit different, and like Joey's talking, and you know, when you look at the Coosa X, a boat like that, it really doesn't need a whole lot of rigging. It pretty much comes with pretty much, I mean, everything you need with the exception of your tackle crate. I mean, you can drop that baby in the water and pretty much go. You don't need any uh, tie downs for your crate. It's all right there underneath the track on the back. I mean, you don't need any paddle holders that are in the bag that comes with the boat. You don't need any like rod holders. They're in the bag that comes with the boat. It's just like Joey said, the Coosa X is really a cut the plastic off the boat and go kayak.
You know, you brought up a
I
great
don't think
point. When people talk about how many baits they carry, realistically, and this is a rhetorical question. I already know what I'm going to throw. You all do too. I'm not asking you what it is, but you know you're not going to throw. You know, I'm not going to throw a jig and spoon. I bring them to seminars and I throw them in the crowd and say, you can have this because I'm never going to use it. You know, I like a buzz bait. I like a jig. I've been catching some fish on a bladed jig. Who doesn't like topwater? You know, and when you get to fall, and if people spent as much time, I think personally, if people spent as much time learning the fish and its habits, they'd be much better off than saying, "Oh, well, I've got," you know, the big thing down here now is the forward facing, and I'm sure you probably have covered all of this in some previous podcasts, but you know, I don't need that. I don't want that. I'm going to derive a lot of satisfaction to pulling up. You know, if I see a big branch sticking out of the water, guess what? There's a tree under there. See, I figured that out all by myself. You know, and if it's spring and the water is about 65 degrees, guess what? There's probably a bunch of crappie in there. Might be a good bass. You know, so that cognitive ability, you feel much more satisfied fooling those fish when you're doing that. That's my thought on it anyway.
You know, like to your point, I see people getting caught up in the whole let's get a 10-inch graph. I mean, I got a 10-inch graph myself and I got the full electronics, but at a certain point, it just gets ridiculous. Let's get a 12-inch graph. Let's get a 16-inch graph. Let's get a 24 volt, 65 amp hour, and then have 100 amp hour for my back motor or for my front motor, and then a 24 volt for my back motor and a 12-inch monitor up front, run dual graphs. But at a certain point, like that's not going to help at all. What really matters is that you maximize your time on the water as much as you can. So if a Coosa X is the way to go, and in terms of like if you don't have a launch ramp, right? Maybe the Coosa X is the kayak to go because it's more minimalist. You literally throw 3 rods inside your kayak, a paddle, and you get going and you travel as light as possible. But if you have a launch ramp that you could back down and etc., maybe a Take 2 or a big rig is the way to go. But yeah, I absolutely agree. Minimalist is the best way to learn. Time on the water is the best thing that you can do. Stop comparing yourself with the next guy over. You'll never find happiness comparing yourself to your 10-inch to a 12-inch graph or a LV32 to LV34 transducer.
Mhm.
You know, those things constantly wrap in your mind and actually take away your happiness, when the true happiness is just experience on the water, the new sunsets and sunrises that you get to experience on the water, and just having fun with your friends or learning a new technique on the water.
You know, one of the fun things that we kind of touched on real briefly there to start was the boats sitting on top of the fish or cruising by the fish. Do you think that being in a kayak and being slower and having to maximize time, maximize efficiency, lets you find those little hidden things that boaters might miss because they're running 100 miles an hour and, you know, sitting on top of the fish instead of, you know, they can move. If they throw at this tree and there's no fish, they're gone, you know. Whereas if we throw at that tree, we may be stuck there for a little bit. So we may have to figure out the area. Do you feel like that makes a difference being that your kayak is slower than a boat.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know how many. I mean, I know I don't know how many tournaments I've been in where, yeah, you go a lot slower. You get to a spot. How many times another boat or two or three pull up next to you just because you just hauled in one, good size fish that they blew by 20 minutes prior. That happens all the time. We're able to get areas that they can't. And they're always peak. I don't know how many tournaments I've been in that there isn't a boat come up next to me that they missed something.
And have you? I know you all are going to answer this the same way. You ever looked at a spot and say, "I guarantee you, there's a fish there." Pull up, drop a bait in there, and catch a fish, and then you get that smile on your face that lasts the whole rest of the day because it wasn't electronics. It wasn't somebody saying, "Hey, I'm going to give you that log." It's kind of you figured it out. You see that. You kind of noodle that around and say, I'm going to pitch that jig alongside the shady side of that log and set the hook on a 4 or 5 pounder. I don't think it gets any better than that.
Well, you're muted.
In my experience, if you go to like Cattle Lake and etc., there's not a lot of water in those cypress trees, and you just kind of like pick off every single cypress tree across a point. You kind of really figure out by covering water slowly, like with for instance, the spinnerbait or chatterbait, you figure out what the bite is, and you can quickly kind of figure out and test the water. Is it a pitch and a flipping bite, or is it a moving bite, and etc. That was my experience of cattle. I think running could actually hinder the strategy of bass fishing. I remember I ran across the Narrows over at Clear Lake from Brados all the way to Nice and Lucerne to hit a grass patch. And that alone in the wind in like 3 or 4 foot rollers at 100%, that probably burned 50% of my battery or 45% of my battery at 100%. And by the time I got to that spot, it was the wrong window of feeding opportunities. So now I honestly think the less you travel from the launch ramp and the more that you slow down and analyze, like for instance, a 50, 100-yard stretch or a bay that you could separate into a small little pond, like a 200-acre pond, you can kind of break down that area a lot more efficiently versus, okay, let's take off 3 hours and go 100% to that area to find nothing and shrink your time of fishing. Now you
and
turn.
How many fish did you run over when you went?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
If you're better at running a motor than you are at fishing, you should probably be running motors. And for me, it's like when I'm teaching people, I'll go back and say the first fish is what I call a surprise. The second fish I call a clue, and the third fish is a pattern. When you find that pattern, replicating that pattern to go someplace else and say they're in 4 to 8 feet of water in treetops, and you tick the branch with a jig and you get a bite. I used to have, when I was doing TV, I tell the cameraman, roll on me. And that meant I know I'm going to catch a fish right here. I'm not saying it happened every time, but it happened to the tune of one was an 8.5 pound largemouth I caught on a crankbait out of a big treetop. And I do think this, and this sounds like a brag, but because I'm sponsored, I'll throw a crankbait where other people won't. When people say, well, I don't want to throw that in there, and say, well, put it in your tackle box. You don't have to worry about losing it. So I've got 10 more of them at home. I'll throw them in some really gnarly looking places.
Yep.
Let's talk about the feeding window just a little bit, Dominic. I think that was a good segue to this. Moon phase, different things like that, feeding windows. You get out your Fish Brain app, you pull out the Farmer's Almanac, you pull out whatever you want, you start talking about moon phases. I want to be honest, I'm going to kind of start this. That is something I 1,000% block out. And here's why, because I'm going fishing anyway. I don't care. I'm not going to sit at home on the couch because the moon is in the wrong position. But how much do you guys look at that? How much does it play into what you're planning to do? Do you try to maximize, be at proper spot at the proper feed time? Is that something that plays into your thought process?
Well, for me, I did a study one year, and because I got to fish a lot, And, I'm not doing again anything somebody else didn't fish. I fished 120 days last year, and I did that when I was working. And I've been retired for 11 years. But one year I did a study, and I would keep a very detailed journal, and I caught 26 fish over 5 pounds. And 25 of those came on 3 days before or after a new or full moon. And the one that fell out of that was out by 1 day. I think it matters. I'm like you, Chad. I'm not going to go based off of the moon, but I'm sure going to check and say, maybe I'll stay out a little longer, or maybe we had our shad spawn in June and July, and there was millions of shad. And so, that's based off of the moon phase. But what I always tell people is, you have to understand, you're competing with 10 million shad. You better throw something that's bigger or looks like that looks like a bigger shad than that other one, because you're competing with those little 2.5 or 3 inch shad. You can't win that. There's no way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care. I'm going fishing whenever I'm going fishing. Like Joey said, there's 3 days before the full moon or a new moon. I believe it to a certain extent. But for me, I feel like I want to be right about every single big fish I catch. So in reason it. So I use the moon if it's setting, or if it's completely
Apex.
out during the day, right? Then I try to reason why I caught that big fish all the time. I think as a bass angler, we always want to think about what are all the factors that come into play when I caught that big fish, and why did I catch it on that specific time and day, and etc. And I think at the end of the day, if we caught a big fish, we caught a big fish. There are certain things that we can be right about, but there's certain things that we can't be right about. And I think that's the biggest thing about bass fishing is kind of builds our ego, like we're all know-it-alls. Let's go out at a full moon. Let's go out 3 days past a full moon or a new moon or before 3 days. But when it comes down to it, are you going out on the water and you are spending every single minute on the water to maximize your time to learn a new technique? I think that's what it comes down to. Like, sure, you could chase the big fish bite, but as long as your lure's in the water, whether if it's 3 days past a full moon or a new moon or before, like, you're giving yourself a chance to catch a PB. And I think that's what it's all about. For me, I think fishing during the springtime from winter all the way up till May, I think is your biggest chance at catching the biggest fish of your life. And I tell you what, I'll take the whole entire summer off of fishing if you told me that I could fish from January to May throughout like every single day, and putting in the minutes, putting in the hours.
Yeah, I'm still, I call myself quasi beginning. I mean, I've been fishing most of my life, but the kayak just a few years. So the weather thing, I really don't put too much stock into it. I probably should, but I'm learning a lot of techniques, a lot more other things right now that when I hear people talk, I listen, and I pay attention, but I'm going fishing no matter what. Like you said, and then maybe if I don't catch one, I'll blame it on, all right, the moon was bad last night, so I didn't catch one.
You blame it on the weather.
Yeah, I'll blame it on the weather.
Reason
give Chris an excuse.
Yeah.
One of the things that and when I was on radio this morning, I talked about, and I believe this, it depends on where you live, but here I say everything eats in October. And I don't care if it's a largemouth bass. I don't care if it's a white-tailed deer. Everything eats in October. The days are shorter. They realize that they're getting ready to, the weather's getting cooler. And I'm like you guys. I don't go based off of the weather, because I've gone into some stuff that's just terrible. But I always counsel people that if you're trying to catch a big fish, there's 2 R's: random action and retrieve speed. So you see how many people catch fish on soft plastics or jigs, and retrieve speed is if that fish is in a neutral or negative feeding mode. I don't care if it's a crappie, a muskie, a bass, whatever it is. If it's in a negative or neutral feeding mode and you buzz something past it, they're not going to chase it. They're just not going to do it. So slower and sometimes a smaller bait. But for me, again, I'll break the rules, because I talk about conventional fishing catches conventional fish. that I'll throw a big wake bait. I'm getting ready to do that on some new water back here. And I don't, it looks, somebody will probably look at me and say, what in the world is that? Well, that's what's getting ready to fool a 7, 8, 9, 10-pound fish.
Now let's jump into this because this was actually my next question, but Joey kind of started leading us there. And I want to go to Dominic first, because the culture in California is completely different. Let's talk about big fish baits. What is your go-to big fish bait?
I mean, I don't know. I think an A rig for me, it's always going to be an A rig or a Chad. Something. For me, it's all in the fun of it. Kind of like when you see a big mark and you're casting let's say, I don't know, A rig or something like that. I don't get, to be honest with you, and this is just sidetracked, I don't get off of drop shotting anymore. I know they catch big fish. Like literally in a day, I caught a 23.75 on a Chad. I believe it was April or May at a local pond. And I saw it eat it. And that window just died. That bite just died. And then later on in the day, I drop shot this sparse weeds in like 10 feet of water with a drop shot. And then I caught a 22.5. So I don't think it really matters the size of bait. I think when it comes down to it, I think, well, if you're chasing big fish, I think it comes down to like, what do you have the most fun with? I think that's the true answer. And to me, the most fun I have is when I see 2, 3 fish or even one fish, right when it comes over their head, they just react to it. Whether if it's a Chad or an A rig or a chatterbait, when you see a wolf pack just coming after your bait, it's the most insane thing. And when one doesn't grab it, the other one grabs it. It's like a whole competition thing. But drop shot, I feel like I could tell you what, 99 out of 100 days, I probably could tell you if I fish a drop shot all day, I'm gonna catch at least one keeper, and I won't skunk for the whole entire day. I could tell you that, and that's why I don't get any satisfaction out of catching a drop shot fish anymore.
How about you, Chris? What's your go-to for big fish bait?
So I'm still trying to find that elusive 20-inch fish. I've caught everything close to it.
Where are you from? Well, what
Maine? I
Maine?
swear,
okay.
I can't. Yeah, and it's funny that when I was on back in August, I was literally going to St. Lawrence River, and I ended up catching a monster small. It was my biggest smallmouth. Nice. It was 19.5 inches, but it was 4.5 pounds. But I caught that on a worm in 55 feet of water. Yeah. And as it was coming up, it just slammed it. But wow. I love the jig bite. Really got into that this year. I've caught some really decent size. But chatterbait's it's probably my go-to. I do fish it a lot, and I fish it pretty unconventional to a lot of people. I'm really slow with it most of the time when I usually fish it like a jig, but then just give it enough. But
really, are you stroking it or what? What's the juice? Are you stroking it? Like, are you casting it in the grass and then you're letting it sit on the bottom and you just stroke it kind of like a flutter spoon?
I will, and if it gets hung up, whatever, I just really slow pull it through until I feel it vibrate again. I have a cadence in my head when I'm bringing it back. I never buzz it back fast, but you guys talk about those big ones. I really just want to get a 20-inch fish.
If you have the time, go at least on one national event to one, for example, like Cattle Lake is, to me, you'll catch a 20 for sure. Mm-hmm. Or Florida, I hear crazy things in Florida as well. I would do at least one bucket list trip out.
I really thought I thought that smallmouth was when I pulled it in. I really did, just because it was the weight of it. But it was I got a big tournament next weekend in Lake George in New York, so I know there's big ones there. So
are there 20s over there, or just mostly 19s?
They just don't bite my bait.
If you want to have fun, if you want to have fun, go back and look at one of my blog posts. It was just before this one, and it's called "Why the Jig." And if you don't want to fish a jig after that, buddy, I'm telling you, I've got 6 over 10 and 1 over 11, and every one of those came on a jig. And the other thing I used to do was I would tag my fish, which the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency frowns on now. But I caught the same fish 5 times, and it was either on a jig or a plastic worm. So it goes back to random action and retrieve speed. So and it wasn't a 10, it was just a really nice. It went from 4 to about 7.5 over the course of the years. But if you can get that fish to hit something else, they don't learn, but they can become conditioned. And that jig looks like a crawfish. And for every 5 pounds of crawfish a bass eats, it gains a pound. So it's the Red Bull for bass, and they will absolutely eat it.
Really? Every 5 crawfish is a pound?
5 pounds of crawfish equates to a pound that fish gains.
I just saw that message from Jesse. Yes, Gene, I want to come down to Florida and catch some monsters with her. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, go out with her. I'm sure you're gonna catch a 20 plus. It's not what you're doing. It's simply where you're at. You know, I think in California, it's highly impossible to catch a double digit in California. I think the best place is gonna be your Texas or Florida area. If you go to my local pond that's been known, I mean, Butch Brown fishes it year round. I don't know if you guys all heard of him. Probably he fishes the Huddleston and the depths 250. He's only caught in 2 doubles, or I think 2 doubles last year from the same pond, and that's not very much. That's not very much at all. So I don't think it's you. I think it's just the area you're in.
You know, it's kind of like and I know I see some of what Chad where you're going, and for me, right behind we live on the lake. So, you know, I've gotten hooked up on that pad bite's gotten me. Actually, that's going to be my next blog post is come over to my pad. And when they explode through that and hit that frog, it'll make you nuts because you're going to miss a bunch of them, but there's nothing quite like the visual of them coming through there. And then if you pitch a ridge tail craw, Texas rig inside there, and all of a sudden you feel that pull down, I'm telling you, it doesn't get much better than that. So the other day I was out, and what I did was, because I'm an old electronics guy, I got in the middle of the lake, and I start moving shallower each time, throwing the frog, throwing a couple spinner baits, minnow plugs, those kind of things. And mine's a kind of a search and destroy thing. I'm going to look around until I find it. Once I find it, again, if I get it locked down to where I'm catching 2 or 3 of them, I'm not giving that up. I'm staying there unless there's a major wind change or cloud cover or something similar to that. But it's being persistent. It really is being persistent. I always tell people you can't catch them from the couch. So you got to go.
Yeah. What state are you from, Joey?
Tennessee.
Tennessee. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now talking about the jigging, this is an important question for those that are listening that are new to the sport, maybe don't have electronics or any of that kind of stuff. And so we'll start with you, Joey. When you're out there and you're fishing a jig, let's talk about what you look for based on feel of bottom structure, contour. What are you looking at that you're throwing this jig at? That you know it's a good area, or you need to move on?
That's a wonderful question. What I look for is I look for secondary structure and singular, like a tree, and I'll drop it inside a tree. I'm using 40-pound braid, which I never used to do, but I'm using 40-pound braid. I throw everything 3/8 ounce, and people say, well, why do you do that? Well, when I was doing casting demonstrations, 3/8 ounce spinnerbait, 3/8 ounce crankbait, 3/8 ounce jig, 3/8 ounce Texas rig, it all feels the same. So accuracy, those fish are not going to chase. It's a rarity for a fish to chase something far away. I'm not saying they won't ever do it, because there isn't any never or always, but I am saying that you have to be willing to put it in there, and then you got to be feeling for that hit. And sometimes that hit feels like nothing. It feels like somebody cut the bait off. And the next one, it feels like they're, especially for the smallmouth, it feels like they're going to jerk the rod out of your hand. So you got to be ready all the time.
Completely agree. I don't think fish. I think one of the things I learned through my electronics is fish do not come across. Like, you cannot pull a fish from 10 yards, 15 feet away. You just can't. Like, you have to put it on top of their head or next to them for them to react to the bait. And I've seen this so many times that I just know. I'm like, you can't attract a fish like 15, 20 feet away. They're not going to target it like that. Unless it's maybe top water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great point, because they'll come up more vertically than they will horizontally. And when people say, well, that fish moved 30 feet to hit that bait, that's never going to happen. And I'll tell you why. If you know return on investment, ROI, they lose weight instead of gaining weight when they chase something 30 or 40 feet. So they're not going to do that. I mean, it would be a rarity to have that happen. And again, I think a smallmouth would go up more than it would go across. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think you have better odds of putting it on top of their head and try to get a reaction off of that versus, dragging it. Once they get about 10 feet away from the bait and they're not actively chasing it, you can forget about that fish. It's time to move on. What you can do is present it to them vertically, where you can actually cast a heavier weight on them, like a half ounce drop shot. So let's say if you're fishing a 3/8 ounce drop shot and you notice they're not biting and they're not following the bait, what you can do is tie on a heavier drop shot weight, just drop it on top of their head, reel it back up, see if they follow the bait up, and then if they don't, and if they do follow the bait up, click your bail, let that bait drop again, and then just hold on, because they're going to eat it. Once they follow a plastic bait, whether if it's a jig or a drop shot, once they follow it down, like
if they're in less than 8 feet of water, we've been catching them by rigging like a Cinco type bait. Strike King's a sponsor, so I'm throwing their zero. But if you're rigging that on a circle hook, and if you've never used a circle hook, I'm going to tell you, it is fun. You throw that out there and it's kind of dropping, and I had it on one of my reels where that thing is dropping down. And when they see that, they can't stand it. You'll feel that tick. And then with that circle hook, you just start reeling. It's like the catfishermen were the ones that use that, but you
circle hook.
The less you do is the best thing. Like Joey said, you just wait for the tick. You hold on, wait for the tick. Because if you are effectively targeting areas bass are, because they like heavy cover or they like sparse grass, if you know that they're there, and it's confidence still, if you know they're there and that's the bite, you cast it out there or you pitch it out there and you just let it sit on semi-slack line and you don't even move it at all, because those fish are smart. Once you impart any action on that bait, they'll be turned off and they'll bounce. Or if you accidentally impart action, they'll follow it by curiosity, but they're not following it to eat it. The majority of the time, they're following it because you imparted action. And then the minute that you just dead stick it right next to them, make it into an easy, natural meal, they just bite. And then you just hold on and you keep on reeling.
And honestly, the most stupid perfect example of that is a backlash in your line. Everybody has seen it. You cast out there and you've got a wadded up mess, and you've got to sit there and you're digging it out, and then all of a sudden you start reeling, and you're like, holy cow, my line's moving. And it's like, and a lot of times that'll be a big fish. Most of the time that'll come off a dead stick. But yeah, that's a really great point to that, and that just shows how factual it is, that little mistake sometimes can be that clue that you actually need when you screwed up.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the real
slow down.
The real screwed up. So talking about that, like, and I think really I'm going to back up to the question just a little bit. When you're feeling the bottom, I know you said you were throwing in trees and different things like that, Joey, but what do you look for on feel? Like when you feel clay on the bottom or when you feel rock on the bottom, is there a time when you're dragging that jig across the bottom surface that you know that, hey, this is not what I thought it was, I need to go? And is there a time when you by the feel, the way the jig feels on the bottom, that it's like, okay, I need to stay here just a little bit when you're trying out a new area.
In the spring, I will go to the northwest part of the lake because it's where it gets the most exposure to the sun. And 2 or 3 degrees will make a tremendous amount of difference. And to your point, and again, I know you guys have all done the same thing. You drop that in somewhere and there's a rock or a stick or something like that, and it bounces off of there, and that fish just eats it, because now it's looking like it's they think it's trying to get away, or they think it's hurt. That's when they're going to eat it.
Gee, Dominic, I mean, what do you feel when you're drop shot? Like you'll know where you're at based on your electronics, but how do you know when you're drop shot, if you drop shot down and you know that the bottom just feels right for where you really want to be?
I don't know, man. I'm a forward facing sonar guy. You know what I mean? It just doesn't have to feel right. I've used it so long that I don't go based on feel, unless, like, I think the drop shot, if I'm trying to feel bottom and I'm trying to feel structured, the drop shot is the least likely bait that I'll pick up. If I'm targeting Highland Reservoir with lots of man-made rock piles, I'm using my side scan and I'm using a football jig, specifically the finesse football Kayak jig, or the Tasmall football finesse jig. And I'll use a 1/2 ounce, and I'll purposely try to fish that thing slow and try to get it snagged. Like I'm trying to feel hard bottom, rock piles, and I won't stop scanning until I find rock piles, pretty much. I refuse to cast a jig into mud. But that's pretty much my technique when I'm using a football jig. For drop shot, it's more of sparse grass, pilings, and that's your high percentage spots, I would say. Maybe grass mats. But then you're starting to beef up all your line diameter. You're beefing up to like maybe 15-pound test, 12-pound test, and you're fishing maybe a 1/2 ounce weight just to get down there real fast and try to take them out of that cover. But
Sure.
but I'm not fishing a drop shot on rock piles. That's not my first option.
I'm gonna throw braided line because I don't want to lose any fish, and I start off with a Palomar knot, and I back that up with a clinch knot because that line will slip sometimes. And one of the things I'll do is I'll take a finesse jig, a small jig, and even a hair jig, and then I'll put a full size crawl on it. And you want to talk about something that just drops, and when it's dropping, it's given that's when it gets hit a lot of times, especially if you can drop it right at the edge of a tree. And most people throw into a tree. Mm-hmm. Think about throwing parallel to that tree. When that tree comes out into the water, you can flip in there. I never flip. I flip maybe 2% of the time. I'm pitching almost everything. But if you can throw that across that tree and kind of work it across those branches, and it's got that slow fall, if there's a fish in there, you're going to know it. They're going to hit it.
Yeah. And to your point, like you said, you put a big creature bait in the back of it, it slows the fall down tremendously on the football jig. Like it just doesn't sink as fast as you think, or as fast as anybody think. The best thing you can do is go to the swimming pool, toss a 3/8 ounce football jig and throw a 1/2 ounce football jig and put a creature bait in the back of it. You'll slowly realize how long it takes for that bait to actually drop down because of all the sheer volume of the bait.
Now I've got a couple audience questions that I'm going to throw at you. So if you guys have got questions, we're nearing the towards the last leg of the show here. So I want these audience questions. If you guys got them, ask them to these guys. Put them on the spot. Rudy Yarworth's going to kick it off. Do you tie right to the braid?
I tie right to the braid, and if it's green or yellow braid, I care about how heavy that braid is. And on spinning equipment, I'll use a fluorocarbon leader, but on the braid, tie right to the braid and get your brown magic marker. Lay your line on a piece of newspaper about 4 feet long. Mark 2 inches, leave 2 inches, mark 2 inches, and it becomes camouflage very, very easily. The fish never sees a straight line. It sees a little bit of brown, a little green, a little brown, a little green. So they never pick up on that. Never.
Yeah, and that was the second part of the question. He said, "Do you color your braid black at the lure? If you do, how about the rest of you guys? Do you guys color the braid tied to braid direct?" I personally, unless I'm using top water, I usually generally have a fluorocarbon leader.
I have a fluorocarbon leader as well, unless it's top water.
I haven't really tested it, honestly. I mean, I'll go. I usually do when I'm drop shotting. I do fluorocarbon most of the time. But I mean, I think he'll bite it. Honestly, I think you drop it right next to them, they're gonna eat it.
If you're throwing a topwater bait on fluorocarbon and it's a small bait, fluorocarbon will sink. Where monofilament won't. It'll ride on the surface. So I'm not saying don't do it. It may be one of those tricks that get you down another couple inches, and sometimes that makes a difference. When I'm throwing an AC shine or a minnow plug, I'm going to throw fluorocarbon. I want that thing to sink a little bit, or jerk bait. Yeah. I want that to sink. I have no interest in that jerk bait riding high. I want it to get down 5, 6, 7 feet if I can and hold it right there.
Yeah, if it's a top water, definitely I throw like minimum 40-pound test braid. If it's a little small walking popper, I'll throw a 25-pound braid. If it's a frog, I'll throw like 50 to 65-pound braid because we have the Delta, we have Clear Lake. Of course, you want to beef it up. Who cares about the long distance casts? But I never tried drop shotting straight braid, and that might be something that I'm willing to do. To give it a shot. I'm not gonna do that in 20-foot visibility in a reservoir, but maybe if it's like Clear Lake or the Delta, maybe drop shot 25-pound 10 straight braid. Actually, my buddy does it. My buddy Pua Yang, he straight braid, drop shotting with a 1/2 ounce weight, straight shank hook, robo worm, and I think he's throwing like 30-pound or 40-pound braid or something like that.
Yeah, see, I'm throwing a lot of. I kind of let the kayak do some of the work at times because my theory, I've actually scaled down my line quite a bit. I don't run any 20 pounds anymore. As far as my fluorocarbon goes, it's all just 10, 15, 10, 12, and 15 is about my max these days. Because, I look at it like the boat moves. So for me, I don't feel like I need as heavy as a line as what I would if I was predominantly fishing out of a big boat, because the big boat, you're not moving with the fish as much. So when you set the hook, the boat's more stationary. Whereas if you set the hook in the kayak, the first thing the kayak's going to do is going to go towards the fish if you don't have a motor naturally. So it's got a little bit more. I need less, I guess is what I'm saying. So I opt for the clarity over the higher tensile strength just because of the fact that I know that boat's going to move just a little bit. Now, if I got my power pole, I have to be a little bit more careful if I'm locked in fishing grass or something like that. But if I'm free floating, fishing different areas, then I don't worry about it near as much. And that's where I get away with. My moving baits are all 12-pound line. My spinning reel baits are 10. And then, my flipping baits are more that 15-pound range. So that's kind of where I stay with that. The next question, best day on the water story and the worst day on the water story. I'll let whoever wants to field that one go.
Well, I went to Mexico to film a video for Bass Pro Shops, and we went to a lake that hadn't been fished in 7 years.
Oh, wow.
I caught 99 bass in a little over 2 hours, and I told the guide, I said, I've got to go in. My triceps were actually cramping up. And worst day on the water, probably, I would say I turtled the kayak in April. I was by myself, but I was wearing a life jacket. Water was about 50 degrees, and so I wasn't real happy about that. And I probably would add one more thing is that my father died in October 23rd, and every year it's a day for Dad. I go out and fish by myself, have a great time, just kind of, that is truly when I don't care what I catch, but magically somehow I always catch a few fish. So best day, another good day, and the worst day.
Wow, geez. Worst day on the water probably would be my the last year on the Connecticut River. Again, it was pretty much my first river trip. And I don't think I caught a fish bigger than 6 inches. And I caught no fish that I could actually scoreable for the tournament. I mean, I caught a lot of fish, so I can't say that I didn't catch anything, but it was horrible trying to find and just trying to figure out the current, and I was a mess. Best day, I'd have to say probably this year, probably my St. Lawrence trip. There's probably a few days there. They were all so much fun, catching big smallmouth, and then changing it all up in the tournament day. I went and caught all largemouth the whole day in one of the best smallmouth fisheries in the nation, but ended up catching a bunch of fish that day. It was a lot of fun.
I think my worst day is probably I don't know if I have a worst day of fishing. Let's go to the best day in the water. Similar to what Joey was saying, there was a lake that was closed off for 6 to 8 months because of dam construction. And so there was zero pressure. The fish were hungry. The fish weren't conditioned to any lure whatsoever. And I was in the Slay Nation monthly tournament. Decided to take a break from the regular events on a monthly basis. I went out to Hodges, and I was just catching 18, 19, 20-inch fish, and I was just complaining about it, right? And I kept on tossing them. And then I come across this organization called Tube Mob, and they're float tubers. And they just welcome me over, and they're just like, dude, come on, man, catch fish with us. And they're catching 22s, 23s, 21s, and we're fishing the same area, but there was like a specific cast on that point. It was the juice. And so they invited me in, and then they took off, and I stayed there with another fellow kayak angler, and I'm making this cast right next to this ledge that breaks off of some rock piles. And I cast my little drop shot 4.5-inch worm, 24-incher, 8.2 pounds. Next cast. Hook into it. 7.2 pounds. 23.75. Next cast. 22. 2 casts later. 3 casts later. No bite. Cast again. 20-incher. So I imagine that was like 112 inches for the day. And then I followed up with the next week at a different spot. And I kid you not, I caught a 23 and another 23.75. I think I totaled 115.75 inches in 2 fishing trips. And that's crazy. And it was majority just rock piles and flats. And I would have thought a jig would be the right bait to throw, and a wobblehead and a 6XD or 8XD, but for some reason they wanted that 4.5-inch worm, and so I gave it to them. And 100 almost 116 inches in one day. That was like one of the priceless moments in fishing. If it was a tournament or not, it probably been like the most joy that I've had ever. Yeah.
All right, next one on the chopping block. What are the top 3 baits for starting bass fishing?
Joey, you go. You have the most experience.
Well, if you're trying to, if it's a newcomer or a child, I'd say a smaller lure with slower retrieve. So that kind of spinner with the beetle spin, kind of a soft plastic on it, that's going to catch a few fish. I stay away from multi-hook baits. I'm giving baits away when I do my thing on Saturday, but I never give children a bait with a hook in it. I give it to the parents. So soft plastics are probably the deal as much as anything else. And I love a tube. I mean, I catch so many. I caught 3 smallmouth on a tube when I was fishing for bluegill, and they were raiding the bluegill nest, and I'd catch smallmouth, pulled up a little further and caught an 8-pound channel cat on a little crappie tube. So smaller baits and slower retrieves, and you want to make sure they're catching something. And there's nothing against fishing live bait. When a kid sees a float dancing around and going down, they get excited. So that's really not a bad idea to do that. So again, smaller baits, slower retrieves. You want them to catch fish.
Can never go wrong with a Senko. Wacky rig.
Right.
Yeah.
I think for me, if I was to put 3 in Jesse's box, because I know Jesse's working on his bass fishing. To preface the question, I won't put 3 baits in a box today. One of them will be a soft plastic worm, probably the old ribbon tail worm, 7-inch ribbon tail worm. I think that's a staple in fishing. You're gonna catch something on it most generally. Texas rig it. You can rig it shaky head. You can do a lot with a 7.5-inch worm. You can drop shot it. It's an endless possibility bait that you can do a lot with. The second, and which probably should have been number 1, would be a spinner bait, because you can't go wrong with a spinner bait. It's good in the morning. It's good in the evening. It can be good midday. It's a real good seasonal bait as well. Early spring before the spawn. Right now, while fish are feeding up for the winter, it's hard to beat a spinnerbait. If you got a lot of grass and different things like that, both those baits work well over top of grass beds and the different things. So 2 very diverse baits. And you can fish them very diversely. You don't have to fish a spinnerbait just reeling it in. You can kind of yo-yo it around and do some different things with it, twitch it, jerk it. There's a lot there. And then I'm gonna have to put a 3/8 ounce jig on there, because I feel like a 3/8 ounce jig is a diverse weight. It'll get you deep and it'll get you shallow. It's not too heavy and it's not too light. So I would put a 3/8 ounce jig, and I would probably, if I had to choose that color, I would probably go black and blue. That's my 2 cents. So
Yeah, for me, it would probably be a drop shot, 4.5-inch worm, and then an underspin. If you're talking about Western region, I would just stick with the underspin. Your 2 main underspins are the Flashy Swimmer by Owner, Cool Baits underspin. Go with your average 1/4 ounce or 3/8 ounce head, and then pair that up with either a 2.8 Kayak all the way to 4.3 inch Kayak. If you're drop shotting, just pick up 3/8 ounce weight and 4.5-inch worm, margarita milliliter or MM3 and robo worm.
I forgot about the robo worm, but I'd still put the firebait worm over top of the robo worm in my area.
Yeah, I think it depends on area too. It definitely does. I was gonna say chatterbait, but I don't know. What do you guys think about the chatterbait? Putting a chatterbait in a beginner's hand?
Well, if somebody's trying to learn how to fish, I would say you can give them a little push button rod and reel, and you can put a floating worm on there, and that floating worm's on about a 10 or 12-inch leader with a really good swivel, and you can put like a 3/0 hook and let them throw that out there, because they can watch it, and then when it disappears, it's not magic. You got a fish, and they pretty much have got it at that point. You can just set the hook on them. So opposite the circle hook, when you're throwing that floating worm, and I throw 2 colors. I throw white, and then I throw what I call sherbet. It's orange and pink, and they eat both of those. And
like instead of like putting a bait in their hands, what I recommend is just support your local guide. There's a few local guides in my area. There's Guppy's Fishing Adventures, and that's for kids. You can drop them off, and he runs kind of like a fishing, almost like a hybrid fishing daycare, where he teaches kids how to fish, tie a bait on, and he puts them on fish, whether if it's tilapia, catfish, or bass. Or go out to Clear Lake Bass Factory in the Western region, go hire Paul Bailey, and he'll put you on some fish. And the best thing I would say, besides, putting a technique in their hands and giving them that, is probably just giving them a guide service recommendation, because that guy's, you're hiring most of them, you're hiring them to go out into the water and do all the homework for you. So when you hop on their boat, They tell you exactly what to do, and they build your confidence with a certain technique. That's honestly the best recommendation if you're starting out.
I think you have to be careful, because in many of the kids that I've taught how to fish, they're doing 15 minutes and they're done, which I get. You have to allow that, because then they want to drink Kool-Aid and popcorn and throw things in the water. You want to make it fun. I mean, if they catch some fish, it's probably going to excite them. And always make sure that they get a picture with their first fish. And here we have the put and take program. Our state agency puts rainbow trout in that range between 7 and 9 inches. And they tell you where they're going to put them, and they're actually normal trout that are hand raised almost. When you throw them in there, they're going to hit anything that comes in there. So they're hatchery trout, and if they catch a couple of fish, they're good.
Yeah, and that's one of the really nice things about Kentucky and Tennessee, is their trout stocking program is pretty phenomenal. If you're down in those areas, you should definitely check the trout stocking situation out. Kentucky and Tennessee, it's great. But no, I think, when you're talking about hiring a guide, I think another thing, if you're an adult and you're wanting to start learning the bass fishing culture, I think is get in a club, fish with some, make some friends, fish with some new people. I mean, you can learn so much, and you don't necessarily have to do it with a kayak. You can join a lot of bass boat clubs and fish co-angler, and there is nothing better than being able to spend those first few frustrating trips out behind in the back of the boat, learning from somebody that hopefully they know what they're doing. It goes a long way. You're going to learn techniques. You can learn a lot by watching their hands and the different things that they do, just like you can watching TV. So I think that would be another thing I would throw out to any adult that's new and kind of has an interest in wanting to learn the sport.
I know I annoy a lot of my friends with a lot of questions almost every day, just asking them different things, and they've been great. That's how you get better. The more times on the water, and just having that camaraderie that will help you with anything you ask.
I think one of the fun things about the sport of fishing, and I think you guys will agree here, it's fun to dream stuff up. I mean, there's no wrong way. There's a better way, but there's nothing wrong with sitting around and dreaming up and customizing baits and kind of coming up with your own thing.
I do that with every bait. Almost everything I take out. With the crankbaits, I had a red hook to the front, and I used to get people to say, "Does that really matter?" I said, "I'll fish with you," and I said, "I'll bet you $10 a fish on which hook they're on." And I said, "I'm going to get about $80 of your money, because they will be on that red hook." I posted a picture yesterday. It wasn't a big fish, a little old fish. It was chasing, threw over there, and it grabbed the red hook. I use the red circle hook when I'm throwing my little wacky. I guess it's I'm not sure who makes it. I know Strike King doesn't make it. Somebody makes it for him. But I mean, I think the red hook makes a difference. And the spinnerbait you asked me about, it really looks like a shad coming through the water. And if you're on pressured water and they see something different, or feel or hear something different, that's gonna help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just me and Joey was actually talking about that yesterday with his bait. He's eliminating some of the sound from his spinnerbait by cutting off one of the Colorado blade off of his spinnerbait, and gives it a little bit more of a slender profile. And like you said, and I completely agree with it, that just that top willow blade looks more shad-like than if you had the other.
Yep.
Now, here's a good question. We're going into overtime. Spinnerbaits. I've on my Facebook page, I've been asking questions and doing some different things here lately. Just engagement, just having conversations with folks, which is always fun and interesting, just to see how different people do different things. But let's talk about the blade colors on a spinnerbait. What are your conditions look like for gold versus silver?
Well, I always tell people, I let the fish tell me. If they're, I'll throw gold, I'll throw silver, and I've got this habit of throwing a bait 10 times, and if I get a bite, then I stick with it. If I don't get a bite, I go to the next thing. And when I was guiding in Canada, and I don't have a reason for this. I don't know why it is. A chartreuse blade with a little spray paint, a red spray paint on it, and a little bit of gold glitter while that's drying. I caught an 8-pound smallmouth up, and it was in Canada, So I mean, it still counts. I got pictures that I'd be glad to show you. But it was they would hit that thing so hard, Chad, that they would break the blades off of it, and I have no idea why they did that. And it didn't matter the watercolor at all. It was kind of tannic acid stained water. But I've used it in other places and caught a lot of fish over 5 on that chartreuse bladed spinner. Again, if you live in a place that gets a lot of activity, whether it's fishing or boating or kayaking or canoeing, if you get a lot of activity, they need to see something different.
Yeah, I'm probably the only guy here that doesn't throw spinnerbait. I'm so not confident with them. I'll throw them every year. Everybody will tell me, throw a spinnerbait today, and I'll throw it a half a dozen times, and it goes right back in my back, and I take out and use what I know. So,
well, and that's good though. I mean, you've got confidence in one thing over the other, and that's good. I put down the spinnerbait for quite some time, and I'll be honest with you, I picked it back up because more people are throwing chatterbaits.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, everybody's got a chatterbait tied on right now. So if I look at it and I go, oh, okay, well, just like Joey's talking about the tube, not a lot of people throw tubes, and not as many people throw tubes as they used to anymore.
Nope.
So you can pick up a tube and have quite a bit of success because it's something these fish really aren't as tuned into as they once was. So it's kind of like the spinnerbait.
It doesn't fall like a worm. It's got that octagonal fall, where it falls this way, that way, this way, that way, falls across that way. And I just Texas rig it, and I put a red bead, and I put a bigger hook. I put a 5/0 hook so that I can go through that tube so I'm not missing fish. So it's a slip sinker, 3/8 ounce. It's a red plastic bead, which you can get at Hobby Lobby for like next to nothing. And then tie that onto the bait. And it'll break that a couple times. It'll break that bead, but for 8 cents, I think I can afford to do that. But that thing has again, random action. I mean, I tell people in seminars, just remember, take your mental highlighter out, random action and retrieve speed. If you get that right, you are going to catch fish.
Yeah. I mean, what Joey said is maybe get 3/8 ounce and a 1/2 ounce spinnerbait, $5 spinnerbait, Strike King, whatever there is. If you want to spend a little bit more money, go depths. And their willow blades have like a certain shad imitation on the side of their blades. They go into detail about their blades. It's really nice, but they're expensive spinnerbaits. But just go learn, put 20-pound fluorocarbon on there. If you have stained water, go target brush piles and stained water, tick it off of the brush piles, tick it off of maybe some grass or pilings. Go night fishing with a spinnerbait. That's my biggest tip.
Throw the black blade.
Yeah, exactly. Throw a black blade, throw a black skirt, go night fishing with it. But during the day, if you're getting a lot of water flow and it's staining up your water, and usually your water is 10-foot, 15-foot visibility in the wintertime, but you're getting you're getting a foot visibility or less, tie on that spinnerbait, because that spinnerbait's going to play a role. And I tell you what, one of the examples that I had early on in the season, California didn't get a lot of rain until this year. Over at Toluk, the water was just gushing in. Water clarity was 6 inches, 3 inches. And my buddy, Don Rochi, he was throwing a spinnerbait in brush piles. He was hooking into like 19 and 20-inch smallmouth, hanging in the brush piles off the bank in 5 feet of water. And sometimes they suck up. First thing they do when the water flows in and that water level comes up and it's stained, they want to just go into that cover, that brush for whatever reason, and just chill in there. So a spinnerbait, man, hands down. I don't care if it's a $5 one or if it's a $30 spinnerbait. Put that thing in your hand, just toss it out there all day. But if you want to build confidence, throw it at nighttime and just slow roll that sucker.
Nice.
Yeah, and everybody's got different views on the rod speed or the reel speeds and different things like that.
Yeah,
I've used to fish with a buddy, man, and to be honest with you, Chris, I had his exact setup to the reel, to the line, to the rod. He would outfish me with a spinnerbait every time. It wasn't till I built my own setup that was just for me with a 5.4 reel, 12-pound line. You know, a
Holy
medium
cow!
action rod.
5'4",
5.4, bro.
5'4"
Mhm.
with 12 pounds. Oh my gosh!
Yep.
All the people down south
Everybody just fell over.
are gonna hate on you.
No, that's fine. I keep 2 5.4 reels on me at all times.
No, 5'4" is
Um,
understandable. The 12-pound
mhm.
test is the guys over the
Well,
West Coast. They would
yeah,
frown upon that for sure.
yeah.
They usually go 20, I think.
The thing is with your crankbaits and different thing, the lighter diameter line dives a little bit further. So when I want to fish that spinner bait a little bit deeper, since it's a moving bait and some clearer water, like different things like that. And again, the kayak's moving, so
Yeah.
therefore, I get away with a little bit more.
Yeah, and rod tip down or rod tip up, both of those make a difference. You'll find it;
Yes,
it
they
makes
do.
a difference.
Mhm.
You know, if you're crawling and
yeah.
rod tip down, or if you're up and it's rod tip up, it's going to kind of hover over the top, and you'll find a
Yeah.
pattern. I mean, you'll find something that works.
Yeah.
Although, hey,
Exactly.
this winter, Dom, I'll take a spinnerbait out this winter. I'll videotape how well it's gonna work.
This winter.
Yeah, you know,
He's going to skip it across that ice.
skip it across the ice.
That is
Hey man,
good.
you know what? A lot of people catch their biggest spinnerbait fish by just letting it sink, taking out a backlash, and then reeling it back
reel it
up.
in.
A lot of
So
people
what you've
catch
learned
their
tonight,
spinnerbait like
Chris, is
that.
all you got to do to break 20 is backlash and let the lure sit,
Let the
that's
spinnerbait flutter down. That's how you're
Yeah.
gonna
and
catch
then
a
dig out your
20.
backlash.
Yeah, find
There
those
you
short
go.
arm. Those short arm spinner baits are the best. And if you can't find them, make them. Just clip off, bend that over a little bit, and clip off part of that wire, and then go back and reattach it. And when that's falling down on helicopter, and especially for smallmouth, they will nail that thing.
Oh, wow.
All right.
Now,
Well, I will tie one
Bringing
on
up-
again. I'll keep using it. I'll keep trying.
Just focus on brush piles. If you can
Yeah.
find some brush piles in the water and just flutter it right through that kind of stuff, because that's where it shines. Or lay downs.
don't be
You're gonna
scared to throw it in the junk.
get bit if you throw it in that junk. Trust me. The best bites, spinnerbait bites I get, it's slow rolling through like the thickest, nastiest stuff there is.
Mhm.
All right.
Yep, absolutely. Well, let's go ahead. We've been on an hour and 16 minutes, so we're gonna kind of start rounding this thing out. I'm gonna start with Chris. Chris, why don't you tell everybody at home where to find you on social media, and thank any sponsorships or anything that you want to thank.
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Instagram. That's my IG right there. It's me Yak Bassin, or it's supposed to be ME for Maine. I want to thank Jackson, of course. I'm new to the team just this year, and then I'm still new. Love it. I can't wait to fish next week in the championship in St. George, and looking forward to it. So.
Dominic.
You can find me Double Digit Angler across all social medias. Main social media is gonna be YouTube and Instagram, but I've been focusing more on Instagram lately. But yeah, I also have a podcast. It's Double Digit Angler on Spotify. Give it a listen if you're part of the West Coast. I think the last one was with Steve Owens. That's on Spotify. It's very interesting because he talks about how he manages the team over at Dugout, how he manages all the trails and etc. You can kind of like get the juice out of it if you're trying to maybe climb the ladders of a fishing brand.
Very good, very good. Joey?
Well, I'm
Take
proud
us
to
home,
be
bud.
with WSM AM radio. People say AM radio. I said we hit 38 states with 50,000 watts, and we're on the World Wide Web. So I get the craziest fan mail from Australia, from Great Britain, whatever. But Fishing Joey on Instagram, Joey Monteleone on obviously on Facebook. And as far as sponsors go, take a deep breath. Strike King, Lose, Jackson Kayak, Bending Branches, K9 Line, Rage Tail, Mid South Tackle, Charlie. Well, here I go. Anyway, I got a ton of sponsors, and I love the product. I got to admit, I love the checks. That's when you're living large, when you're getting paid to fish. Charlie Brewer makes a slider in Lawrenceburg, and if you're looking for something for kids to catch fish on, that little slider with a small lead head will catch fish almost everywhere. So there's more people. There's a bunch of more people, but thanks to WSM and thanks to everybody else, I've been doing this for a little over 40 years. So I think I'll try to get another 5 or 10 in and see what we can do with that.
Man. Well, Joey, sign us off for tonight.
Well, I'll be Tennesseeing you. Thanks for tuning in.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.